experience in economic policy. He has worked with the World Bank as consultant and carried out research assignments for international organizations such as International Labour Organization, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and Asian Development Bank, amongst others. He is also the founder and member of Broadband Society for Universal Access and has served on the board of Delhi Management Association. Welcome, sir. We also have with us Dr. Arindam Banerjee, who will be responding to our panelists as discussant. Dr. Banerjee is Associate Professor in Economics at the School of Liberal Studies, Ambedkar University, Delhi. He teaches and researches in the areas of agrarian development, colonialism, political economy, food security and poverty, and biofuels. He has also been external consultant to the International Fund for Agricultural Development and Food and Agricultural Organization. We have 4 presentations in this panel. The first presentation is on FDI trends in post-COVID era. It will be done by Ms. Shubhi Bhandari. This paper is co-authored by Mr. Santosh Pai, who is Honorary Fellow and Treasurer, ICS. The second presentation will be done by Dr. Khanindra Das, who is Assistant Professor at Birla Institute of Management and Technology. Dr. Das will be presenting on economic interdependence since COVID-19, China and South Asia. Next, we have Dr. Radha Raghurampatruni, Associate Professor at Gandhi Institute of Technology and Management. She will be speaking on trade performance between China and the Brics regional group. Our last presentation is on trade irritants and non-tariff measures between India and China. This paper is authored by Dr. Malini Tantri, Assistant Professor, Dr. Nalin Kumar, Associate Professor, and Dr. Varadurga Bhatt, Assistant Professor at Christ University. Before we dive into these very interesting presentations, let me quickly announce 2 important ground rules. First, I'd like to request the panelists to kindly stick to the time slot that the chair will decide. The second is for the question and answer session. I'd like to request the audience to kindly use the raise hand option on Zoom and to please type in your questions or comments in the chat box and to unmute only when the chair calls upon your name. With this, I'd like to invite Professor Kathuria to kindly give his opening remarks as chair and to carry on the proceedings for the session.
Thank you, Preksha. And at the outset, let me thank Ambassador Kant for inviting me to this very exciting session, as you said. There are 4 papers, and I will go in the order in which you have announced them. Let me just say a couple of things that all papers are extremely relevant, especially when we speak from a political economy perspective between India and China. And my experience in economic policy has been often in has been that
what we are doing,
while economics is important, politics plays an even more important role. And where better do you go than South Asia to say that within South Asia, integration is perhaps the least in the world. If you look at India and Pakistan, for example, and you impose the gravity model on India and Pakistan trade, India and Pakistan might be located as far as between India and Brazil. So that's the kind of trade that happens between India and Pakistan, as if one country was located in South Asia and the other country was located in Latin America or South America. And that's not very good because we know that a lot of trade happens within regional groupings. You look at the EU, there's a lot of trade that happens within the EU. There's a lot of trade that happens within East Asia. Unfortunately, South Asia, because of the political economy influences, remains the least integrated region in the world. And post-COVID, both trade and investment have suffered in the region. And some of the papers will bring that out, how Chinese investments in the neighborhood and in India has been affected as a result of COVID. No doubt 2 to 3 years later, we might see a pickup. But trade within South Asia and trade between India and China, India and South Asia, and to an extent between India and South Asia or within South Asia remains hostage to political economy influences. And I think it's important to try and understand whether we can use trade to bring about some amount of peace or trade. We can use trade as an instrument of peace building. And that's a part of the trade literature. And a lot of people have often cited that as a part of the trade literature. Of course, another part of the political economy is that first we need to have good relations and then we will engage in trade. It doesn't have to be either or situation. Both can go together. You can have peace building measures. At the same time, you can use trade as an instrument for building those measures so they can reinforce each other. But often the ministries of commerce in countries and the ministries that are responsible for external affairs, often they don't see, there is not much meeting of the minds. And I think the meeting of the minds between countries and within countries can happen if there is more dialogue and there is more economic interdependency. And that's what I think some of these papers are trying to do. The second point that I would make is that it's extremely relevant at this stage, especially for a country like India, that we are talking about the Chinese economy, we are talking about how China is behaving in the region, because, as you know, we have several initiatives within India that wish to diversify away from China. And of course, we all understand as economists and as foreign policy analysts, we all understand that there is going to be some cost associated with trying to disrupt the existing value chains, and we have to be willing to bear that cost if we are to diversify away. Then, of course, the other feature in the background is India's unwillingness, or at least at the moment, unwillingness to participate in the bigger trade deal of the region. So now we are not a part of any of the trade deals, the mega trade deals that exist in the world. We are not, of course, a part of the TPP or the modified CPTPP, and we are not a part of RCEP, although the window is open for us to join RCEP whenever we want to. But that's an important element in India's both economic and foreign policy, that we are not a part of RCEP. And if there are any costs as a result of not joining RCEP, how are we going to overcome those costs? Are we going to negotiate bilateral trade agreements much more than we did in the past? The other development, of course, which is relevant from India's perspective, as well as from South Asia's perspective, is the demographics of each of our countries, especially India, which is a young country. And therefore, you have a focus on this Make in India program, which I don't think we should confuse with the self-sufficiency. Often it tends to get confused in briefings and in discussions with the self-sufficiency of the 60s and 70s. It's very, very different. This is a much more calibrated and nuanced Make in India, although there are signs of protectionism. And I think those signs of protectionism reflect the concern that India and other countries in South Asia will have, given the demographics, about labor markets and trying to develop sort of jobs within the country. I think the jobs agenda remains very, very crucial to India and to South Asia. And given that there's a lot of Chinese investment that is coming into South Asia, not so much to India, along with workers. So when Chinese investment comes in, it comes with workers, and sometimes there is displacement of jobs within the countries. And these are concerns, apart from debt dependency, that are concerns. Jobs, I think, remains a big concern for us in the region. So these are the developments in the background of which we can measure these papers or look at these papers. We have to build resilience. We have to create jobs. We have to look at alternatives to mega trade deals if we are unwilling to participate in it. But we cannot shun trading. We cannot shun FDI. Those are given in an interconnected world. The dominance of China, balancing the power of the United States is a given. You have to accommodate China in the language of foreign policy experts. You can't, you have to manage the rise of China. You cannot counter it, and how best we can counter it is something that we have to see both within India and in South Asia. So it's an extreme pleasure to be a part of this, erudite young faculty. We're going to present papers, and I'm delighted that we have a discussant in the form of Arindam who's going to discuss each paper. Arindam, will you discuss the paper right after it is presented or right at the end, however you want to do it?
No, I think it'll be good if I come in at the end.
At the end. Okay, yeah. So we have the 4 paper presentations. There are 10 minutes each. Please stick to your time limit so that we can have Arindam give his comments, and then of course we'll field the questions from the audience. So please stick to your time limit of 10 minutes each, as Preksha had mentioned. I'll now invite Shubhi Bhandari to present FDI trends in post-COVID era. Can India's paradiplomacy harvest gains from China's loss? A very important question. Surabhi, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, sir. I'd like to request access to share my screen, please. I'd like to request access to share my screen, please.
Preksha, can you give Shubhi the access? Please, she's requesting access.
Professor, she will have access now. I'm going to try it out now.
Yes, just give me a second.
If you can adjust the screen, I think yeah.
Okay, can I see on the larger screen? इसमें दिखता नहीं है, नहीं presentation होता है.
I'm sorry, I'm unable to share the screen. I need to make the co-host, I guess.
Colonel Venkat, could you please help?
Ma'am, can you check again, please?
Yeah. It's getting glitched again.
We were able to see a screen a while ago.
Yes, I am aware. Could you please confirm if the screen has been shared? That'd be really helpful.
Yes.
Yes, we can see it. Please go ahead.
Honorable Chair, distinguished gentlemen and ladies, I'm Shubhi Bhandari, a legal practitioner and independent researcher. Today, I'm presenting a paper on FDI trends in post-COVID era. Can Indian paradiplomacy harvest gains from China's loss? I have co-authored this paper with Mr. Santosh Pai. He is an honorary fellow and treasurer at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi. I had approached him to collaborate on Chinese FDI policies, and we happened to write this paper for the conference. As I begin, as we all know that there are vast dissimilarities between the design and the structure and even the performance of FDI policies in both India and China. While, of course, in recent times, China has witnessed consistent growth in FDI inflows, especially since 1978, there is, of course, a post-COVID-19 downtrend that is expected due to diversification and, up to a certain extent, disruption in the global value chains. The COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, the US-China trade war has been expected to disrupt not only just the power chain supplies, but also the manufacturing and processing units in China. As China happens to have the global value chains, there are different countries that seek to diversify away from China and look for more encompassing manufacturing units across the globe. Regardless of their fundamental differences in political systems, including their tax regime, there are some commercial logic dictates and even the legislative policies that facilitates a comparison between the FDI environments in two countries. So to start with, there are multiple FDI experiments that China has done in last 20 to 30 years. A few of them are, first is the import substitution. Through this, China endeavored to rely solely on technologies that were imported during the industrialization period. During this phase, foreign trade was restricted up to a certain extent where it was only allowed through mandatory government protocols. Exports were also given only to compensate for the lack of imports. There were multiple government-backed subsidies, and there was protection for capital and technology incentive industries like automobiles, steel, etc. One major feature of this phase was that state-owned firms that manufactured goods through use of machinery and technology from Soviet Union was encouraged. Now, although this was one of the first FDI techniques that China had incorporated, it was only short-lived and it did not work in those times. Therefore, there was no FDI inflow in China at that point. The second was exclusive legal regime for foreign investors. There were multiple legislative incentives that were incorporated by China, such as the Sino Foreign Equity Joint Venture Law, which encouraged free and market-oriented economy for the first time in the history of Chinese economy. The second was wholly foreign-owned enterprise law in the year 1986 that endeavored technology, machinery, and provided a preferential export mechanism to foreign capital-backed enterprises existing in China. The other one was contractual joint venture law, which was incorporated in 1988, that gave freedom to hybrid enterprises, which were basically a mix of foreign-backed capital and domestic capital, to have discretion to choose their own contractual term. Although this was one of the unique incorporations of China, it was again short-lived, especially because this did not make the domestic enterprises at par with the foreign enterprises in terms of legal barriers or impediments that they had to face. So it was very easy for the foreign enterprises to get away with the stringent domestic legal notions. The third one was special economic zones. This is one of the most prominent FDI experiments that China has done, primarily because this happened to be the biggest drivers for FDI. There were a couple of major SEZs that China had built over the years from 1980 to 1988. However, the most prominent remains 1992, which was Economic and Technological Development Zone that was created solely to incorporate policies of granting inexpensive lands, tax holidays, custom clearance, tax exemptions, etc., especially on imported raw material that was used to produce goods that those were being targeted in foreign markets. The next is was the promotion of joint ventures. Now, joint ventures, this is also one of the experiments that leveraged well in the Chinese market, especially because by 1978, Chinese market grew to incorporate a lot of imported technology, which attracted negative attention from global media, especially when China then was accused of stealing technology in order to foster its own R&D. At that point, to curb this negative attention, the China joint venture law was implemented, and one of the important features of this was that in the collaboration of a domestic firm and a foreign firm, should the foreign firm was discovered to be using an outdated technology or machinery, there was a compulsory penal compensation that had to be given to the Chinese government and also to the local firm that they had collaborated with. The next one happens to be decentralization. Decentralization, a striking feature was that it delegated the power to approve or disapprove foreign investment proposal to local governments in Chinese model. Some of the prominent industries that was at the receiving end were automobile, electronics, IT, etc. There were two reasons for it. Firstly, because of availability to easy domestic market and low cost labor. However, decentralization came at the cost of sacrificing local firms to attract investment from foreign companies, so much so that at some province they were willing to make this difficult choice to let go the power and the control in the domestic entity in the way to attract FDI. The next one was the role of bureaucrats. The most prominent feature was there was a set formula to judge the amount of investment that was being made in each province, and the role of bureaucrat was also accommodated certain value through which FDI was distributed. Even though this happened to be the one of the easiest way to attract FDI, the distribution process remained extremely difficult due to a lot of political turmoil that China was facing at that point. The next was FDI through SMEs. Although a unique experiment was to attract guerrilla investors through an informal arrangements. When I say informal arrangements, it means that they had their own independent buying and selling channels across China, and some through nearby areas like Hong Kong and Taiwan. And these license holders, they were prohibited from outsourcing any manufacturing activities. Should that be discovered, they were also given adequate penal compensation. These were short-lived because these were incorporated only for specific products, like some parts of automobiles or some heavy steel production, and these were for short, small or quick projects only. The next was technology absorption to FDI. Like I mentioned, that China earlier was accused of stealing technology from across the globe, which had attracted negative attention and that also led to loss of FDI. To counter this, there was a 15-year science and technology development plan incorporated in 1982, which introduced advanced technology from abroad and completely eliminated the research and development prospects in China. However, this did not bear a lot of success as contemplated, which is why instead of 15 years, the Chinese government curbed this into 5 to 10 years, and it encouraged independent research along with import of technology from foreign countries, especially in some manufacturing units such as chemical, petrochemicals, in renewable energy, in green energies, etc.
Shubhi, may I request you to please move a little faster?
Sure. Now, the most important question is that why is FDI important for India today? This is for threefold reasons. Firstly, that there's a prominent need to increase the share of FDI allocation in manufacturing sector. The second one is that because there is not adequate distribution of FDI in manufacturing sector, there's a lot of self-reliance in the production process on China and of course other countries. Therefore, there's a need to be need to become more independent in terms of imports and FDI allocation even in the hybrid domestic enterprises. Now, when compared to FDI in China, there are certain shortcomings of India's FDI policies. The three important one being, firstly, that there is no per se consistent growth in the last 20 to 30 years. Secondly, there's also a failure to direct FDI and to distribute it adequately, like I've already mentioned, across all the geographical territory. For example, only certain cities like Mumbai, Bangalore, Chennai, etc., they had received most amount of FDI, while other developing cities and states have lacked. The third one is the failure to leverage FDI across a diversified manufacturing sector. Now, this comes handy, especially in lieu to create jobs and absorb technology that has been importing in India and also being generated through R&D in India. Now, there are several learnings for India from China's FDI experiments. I like to highlight the top 5. The first one is that in China, preferential treatment was given to foreign investors and foreign companies. However, in India, it is absolutely barred by the Indian Constitution, and the principle of national treatment comes in handy, which ensures that equality has to prevail across all legal entities, irrespective of their place of establishment. The second one is that although there are across 500 SEZs in India, however, 30% of them are still non-operationals, and the rest cater only to IT and ITES. Now, there could be certain incentives that could be granted to boost FDI in these SEZs. For example, duty-free imports for import. It could be tax exemption for 5 years, etc. The third one is that there is no specific law which governs the relationship between a joint venture of foreign investors and domestic enterprises. Although India did try to incorporate a few UK and US based laws, yet they remain ineffective due to the traditional business systems prevailing in India. The fourth one is that even though the Indian legislation is decentralized up to a certain limit as China, yet the state governments have limited ability to incentivize FDI because allocation of FDI still remains in the hands of the central government. The fifth one is that there's an absence of national policy to identify and to prioritize sectors who would receive the majority of FDI in Indian state. This is the reason why there have been overlapping of FDI allocation or have been lack of FDI allocation, which leads to creation of thirst areas. To conclude this, I'd like to propose a couple of incentives that could be incorporated in the Indian FDI policies, in addition to what is prevailing, basis what the Chinese government has experimented and has been absolutely successful in attracting FDI. The first one is that in order to create a global value chain, there's a pertinent need to reduce overlapping between industrial policies incorporated by states, and also to provide clarity for foreign investors about the national priorities that India is aiming for. The second one is to develop clear parameters to judge what the benefits and the disadvantage of FDI incorporation in Indian economy are, such as technology, gaps in supply chain, etc. The third one is to develop a personalized government-led SEZ policy to promote these locations for FDI attraction, especially for manufacturing units. For example, petrochemical energy. These are the manufacturing units that have to be installed in an SEZ. So it is very important to give them incentives so that these niche areas also receive FDI from the foreign investors. The fourth one is to provide SME focused incentives to draw these niche players that are not adequately prevailing on the economies of scale, yet contribute a significant portion to the GDP. The last one is to incentivize absorption of technology, both that has been incorporated from independent R&D in India and imported from foreign land. In order to do this, one of the most important things at the moment to be done is to conduct periodic surveys and consultation among these foreign investors that are already operating in order to understand their experience and to learn what their need of the requirement is. For example, in areas of land acquisition or human resources that are allocated or tax exemptions, etc. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shubhi. We'll come back after the presentations are over, but let me say that the paper is extremely important, and this is not the first time post-pandemic that we are talking about trying to leverage from, in a sense, if you would, what you're calling China's loss, or the rest of the world looking to diversify away from China. Remember the first time when Chinese wages were rising, when China was developing really fast, and it was developing, 10% a year for 30 years. No country has been able to do that before. Necessarily, wages had begun to rise in China, and that was the first time that India began to talk about trying to attract some of those investments which were leaving China because of high wages and try and attract them into India. The second, of course, as you mentioned, was the US-China trade war, and the third is now the pandemic. So this is the third opportunity in some sense for countries like India and developing nations to try and absorb some of the investments. But as you said, the environment needs to be right to be able to leverage those investments that are fleeing from China and looking for more sort of equitable or more equanimous areas to invest in. Let me now move to the second presentation of the evening. May I request Dr. Khanindra Das, who is going to speak on economic interdependence since COVID-19, China and South Asia. Again, an extremely important topic. Dr. Das, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
You're audible. You're audible. Please go ahead. You have 10 minutes.
Sure. So, and please confirm if my screen is visible.
It is.
Okay, that's great. So, the topic here is economic interdependence since COVID-19, China and South Asia. Thank you, Chair, for setting the context. I will not go into the realities of the levels of integration within South Asia. Here in this paper, I am talking about the China factor, both in economic and strategic dimensions. So I'll be brief. I'll have a few figures to show, and apart from that, I'll talk about a few pertinent points. So the basic highlight of our paper is that we observe a lot of alignments both in economic and strategic dimensions, but we are good at the South Asian nations would be benefiting more in the long run if they encourage fair competition rather than going by geopolitical perspectives in their engagements with either India or China or with respect to any other major countries of the world. And here is the outline. I would be talking about trade, of the South Asian countries with respect to China, followed by some figures on investment, and also about the aid, especially in the COVID era, and then talk about the strategic issues about strategic reinvigoration of South Asia, and this has happened not only with respect to BRI but also with respect
Dr. Das, we lost you.
So because in the end I'll not be able to summarize the stated here. So there is some decline in trade in the post-COVID scenario, including slowdown in investment, but that is not to take or make a case for vibrant engagement through other is given in 2019 and 2020. 19 is the pre-COVID and 20 is the post-COVID. So here in this graph, I see that in the April to September, these 6 months, we can see.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you please, maybe we can try, could you stop your video and just use the audio? Would that help? Because your voice is dragging right now.
Yes, there has been some reduction in imports, especially since April to September. For India, from
Dr. Das is not audible. Dr. Das?
Sir, I have dropped him a message. Maybe we could hear him after a few more speakers.
Yes, yes.
Yes, I think. Am I there?
Yes.
Okay. So sorry for the interruption. So the point here is that imports has come back to the pre-pandemic level, especially in the October and November months. And look at the exports. We see here that in the post-COVID era, the month-wise export of India to China has actually been higher since May and October, since May to October, but we can see that export has again in November failed to surpass the 2019 levels. So I just would like to tell that I have added October and November figures in addition to what I had submitted to the conference to just give you the latest updates. Now let us see some of the figures with respect to South Asian nations, which is with respect to Bangladesh. We can see again there is a fall in the trade with respect to China, and same thing we can see with respect to Nepal. Both imports and exports declining in the post-COVID era and with respect to Pakistan as well. So this is in the context of trade. Now look at the investments. And since 2013, I have put the figures here, but if you look at the 2020 figure, number of projects or amount invested compared to the coming back to the huge effort made by China to reach out to almost all the South Asian nations, except for Bhutan. Even in the case of India, also we have seen some supplies coming, of course, from private channels, like say Alibaba, donating certain things in the beginning of the pandemic. So this is to highlight that even now I have not given here the vaccination related also. There are a lot of efforts made by China to reach out to the South Asian countries. Now I go to the strategic part, which is giving a lot of reinvigoration of the South Asia. So we already know about BRI, but with respect to Indo-Pacific also, there has been immense importance given to South Asian nations. India, of course, the leading nation to engage with the IPS. Even India also have taken several steps, including multimodal planning of China's BRI. And I can go little details. If you remind me about 3 minutes prior to my time, I can finish on time. And so here, if we look at Chinese engagement, because this paper is about how China is into South Asia even after post-COVID, or so we can see they are giving tariff concession to Bangladesh on about 97% of products with effect from July 2020. So that is one thing to note. And we know that there are other developments. India relying on Atmanirbhar, which has been interpreted several ways. So in that context, since the trade with India is not flourishing, so China is trying to lure some of the South Asian countries to get economically or otherwise involved with the Chinese initiatives. So that is one thing I would like to highlight. And of course there are countermeasures both in economic front and in the strategic fronts, but as has been discussed in this conference, the RCEP factor has concerned many of the South Asian countries as well. Example is Bangladesh. They have
Dr. Das, we lost you again. Dr. Das? We seem to have lost Dr. Das again. Can we, do you think we should wait, Preksha, or should we move to the next presentation?
So maybe he could continue in the QA before the Q&A session, because he had a minute left.
Yes, yes. There's clearly a need for more FDI in telecommunications infrastructure.
Sir, Dr. Das is not reachable on the phone as well, so I think we should continue.
So I think we'll give him an opportunity again if he wants to just round up what he was presenting. He was talking about China's increasing engagement, especially in South Asia, and what kind of implications it has. And I think the subtext of that presentation is the competition that India is facing from Chinese investments, especially in the region. And there's a lot of good quality research that has happened, not in the context of South Asia, but in the context of Africa at least, and in some cases in the context of Myanmar, where Chinese and Indian investment. Of course, India cannot compete in the magnitude of the Chinese investments. I mean, if you looked at those figures on that table, $48 billion going into Pakistan, $24 billion going into Bangladesh. Obviously, India can't compete in the magnitude. So if India is to compete with China, it has to be through other means, through the means of its soft power and through means of trying to create much more sort of people-to-people contact and try and leverage some of its strengths, but not in terms of monetary competition. I think that's the message that might come out from Dr. Das's paper, but we'll let him summarize when if he's able to join again. May I now request Dr. Radha Raghurampatruni for her presentation. Sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Who is going to talk on an empirical analysis of trade performance between China and the Brics regional group. Again, Brics presidency is coming up, and this will be an important topic. Dr. Radha, the floor is yours.
Namaskar, respected chair, discussant, and all the respected participants.
You're not audible. You're not audible.
Sorry. Yeah, sir, my voice is audible right now?
Yes, now it is. Now it is.
Namaskar, respected chair, discussant, and all the respected participants. I'm Radha Raghurampatruni. My paper is on empirical analysis of trade performance between China and Brics countries. So, as we know, the Brics economies, they have emerged as a major driving force in the global economic arena with a balance of power that is drastically shifting towards Asia. Now, with Brics countries with 43% of the world's population, they account for 1/5 of the global output and 1/5 of the trade and FDI inflows. And of late, these economies are also emerging as a major source for aid for the continent. And among the Brics, especially India and China, they have been outperforming the West. And as we see, they say that the growth momentum towards it has shifted towards Asia now. And this particular era belongs to Asia. So with a combined gross domestic product, the Brics countries today represent more than 15 trillion. So, and they account for 19.3% of gross global product. And as we all know, they represent 25.7% of the world's land area. And if we see since the last decade, these countries, they have been contributing of more than 50% of world economic growth. And as we see, intra-BRICS trade also has been rising gradually. 2010 data, if you take, it is just $567 billion, and 2017 it has increased to $744 billion. So with this backdrop, I'm sorry, like, is my voice audible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
Of late, China has been playing a leading role, especially with respect to BRICS countries, and as an important trade partner for BRICS countries, also as a main investor, and also as a major source for foreign direct investment into the BRICS countries, and also among the BRICS countries attracting the largest foreign direct investment. And in the current context, China wishes to increase its trade, economic, and cultural ties with the BRICS countries because it would like to open its financial markets as a cushion against the growing global uncertainty. And also of late, what we have seen just a few months back, because of the growing tariff war, which the other participants also have mentioned, between US and China, and also with other countries and China would like to open its economic ties with the BRICS countries. And with the coming change in the US government, we wish that this gap will not be there in the future, in the coming future months. So in this current background, my paper tries to investigate the Chinese economic performance with respect to the 5 BRICS, with the rest of the 4 BRICS countries. So the paper has, it's an empirical paper. The paper has adopted a few techniques. Initially, I have adopted the trade intensity index measure of measuring China's intensity trade with the rest of the 4 BRICS countries. This is a basic intensity index which I have used. Along with that, basically, I have also presented the intra-BRICS trade, the growth with respect to intra-BRICS trade, and also percentage of the BRICS countries trade with the rest of the world economies is also presented for a time period of 10 years. Then I have used the basic Balasa index, Balasa index, that is revealed comparative advantage index, in its initial value, where I have extracted the data for a 10-year period of time. And the commodity categorization I have taken from WTO, World Trade Organization classification. And for the 14 commodity group, I tried to investigate the revealed comparative advantage index for all the BRICS countries. Then after measuring the RCA index, I tried to analyze the revealed import dependency index for this basic Balasa index of the 14 commodity group. The reason for adopting revealed comparative advantage and revealed import dependency indexes, I tried to match the comparative advantage with import dependency of all the BRICS countries. So this is going to, this has given me a larger perspective, like whether there is a feasibility of trade among all the BRICS countries. That is, I have done with the basic Balasa index. Then at the later stage, I tried to use the Walrath revealed comparative advantage index, where along with the basic Balasa index, I tried to see the revealed RMA, revealed import advantage, and also I tried to calculate the revealed trade advantage. So by deducting the revealed export advantage and revealed import advantage. Then finally, I calculated the RC index, revealed competitiveness index. So while we observe the revealed competitiveness index, for this I have adopted for China with the rest of the BRICS countries. So initially, by matching RCA and RID, I tried to get a larger perspective of the BRICS countries. Then at the second stage, I used China versus rest of the 4 BRICS countries, so that I try to find out the revealed competitiveness of China with rest of the BRICS. That's I'm going to present in the later part of my paper. Then finally, I tried to test the stability of this revealed comparative advantage for the commodity categorization that I have taken, because the time period I have taken is from 2008 to 2018. So in a certain period of time, that is in 2008, if the revealed competitiveness is exhibited for certain commodity category, for China with rest of the BRICS, it may not be so in the later part of the time period. So this I try to analyze in the stability index that I have used. So this is the basic plan of my paper, which I'm going to present. So introduction part, as I have already mentioned about the BRICS countries, and I'm quoting about this Jim O'Neill, where he mentioned in his book Dreaming with BRICS, the part to 2050, where he has presented saying that in the coming 2050, it is like the BRICS as a group, they are going to surpass in dollar terms even with respect to G6. So in this background, I tried to analyze China's trade performance with the other BRICS countries, because today we see the BRICS intra-trade has been comparatively low with the rest of the regional groups. Of course, the BRICS Development Bank has been established, and the countries also started playing a very important role in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and BRICS also started flowing loans not only to BRICS but other developing economies, and BRICS countries individually, they started playing a very important role in the world platform. But still, BRICS, when you compare the size of the intra-BRICS trade, is still not comparable with the rest of the BRICS countries. So in this paper, and with the growing uncertainty of the world trade and taken the post-COVID uncertain situations, I tried to investigate Chinese trade with the rest of the BRICS countries. So with this background, a few objectives, as I have already mentioned. Initially, I tried to observe the trends and pattern of BRICS countries' economic growth. Then I tried to assess the potentiality of China trade with the rest of the 4 BRICS. Then identify some of the commodities which have potential to trade within BRICS and China with the BRICS countries. So with these few objectives, I have already explained about the methodology that I tried to adopt. Initially, the intensity index. I also presented the intra-trade and BRICS trade as a percentage of world trade. Then I tried to calculate the comparative advantage and import-dependent index of overall BRICS with the commodity categorization I have taken. Then Chinese with the rest of the BRICS, RC revealed competitiveness index and stability of the index I tried to test. And the commodity categorization adopted for the first is like 14 different commodities that I have extracted from WTO. And for the second, China with the rest of the BRICS commodity categorization, I have adopted list of 37 commodities which are categorized under 17 different categories. So with this methodology, just a glance of percentage of world exports and imports. So which obviously shows like the percentage as if we take all the BRICS, the China as a percentage with respect to the world has been always been larger than the other BRICS countries, given the magnitude of trade that China does with the rest of the world. Then intra-BRICS trade. Interestingly, in this actually shows like again the intra-BRICS trade with respect to, if you take South Africa and if you take the Brazil, Russia, India, China, all the countries, you can see like the country South Africa, the trade share has been the trade share has been 16.04% with respect to intra-BRICS exports as a percentage of global exports, and China has been 7. Similarly, India has been 8. And of all, you can see like Brazil is dominating with respect to intra-BRICS exports and also intra-BRICS imports. Then I try to, and as I said, I try to present the trade intensity index with rest of the BRICS countries. And when you observe the trade intensity index with the rest of the BRICS countries, one interesting intensity index, if you see, this intensity index is calculated Chinese intensity index with the rest of the 4 BRICS countries. So the index, as we know, the intensity index ranges between 0 and 1, and China's trade intensity index with the rest of the BRICS countries, they have been more than 1. But if you take the intensity index of China with respect to India for all the time period period. The time period I have taken, as you can see, from 1995 to 2018. But with respect to India, it has been lower than 1. For most of the years, it has been 0.5, 0.35, 0.4. So the basic TII index for none of the period with India was showing more than 1. But with rest of the countries, the intensity indices value has been more than 1. And one other observation is the intensity index with respect to Brazil has been coming down since the year 2009. So this is one observation with respect to intensity index. Then I have calculated results of the correlation, the basic correlation analysis, and this correlation analysis again is done with respect to China and the rest and the 4 other BRICS countries. And the correlation in the first part, it has been done with respect to exports of China with the BRICS and other BRICS, and imports of China with the other BRICS. Similarly, for total trade and trade balance, also the basic correlation analysis has been done. So this is just a basic analysis to investigate, and which shows a negative figures, which presents that the exports and imports and total trade and trade balance has not been on par with for the other BRICS countries with respect to China. And so proper policy initiatives in this direction can improve the situation, especially with respect to the trade balance of other BRICS countries with China. Then I have calculated, as I said, the revealed comparative advantage index, the RCA and RID has been calculated for all the BRICS, for all the taken given BRICS countries for 14 different categories, and which shows that and which presents that there is a feasibility of trade with respect to BRICS countries that could be tapped. For example, out of the 14 categories of the commodities that are taken for analysis, it was shown that nearly 30 commodities are actually feasible for trade among the BRICS countries. So with this, I also tried to calculate the revealed comparative advantage index, the Walrats index after the basic Balasa index, which actually gives a better idea about like revealed trade advantage, revealed export advantage, revealed import advantage, and at last taking the logs, the revealed competitiveness index. So for different 37 commodity categorization, this has been done. Which shows that out of the all the 37 commodities that are taken, it presents that nearly for 22 commodities, revealed competitiveness for China trading with the other BRICS countries could be seen. So it means that there is a feasibility and there is a potential for commodity trade in these commodity categories that could be tapped by the other BRICS countries. Largely, it is seen that majority of the other BRICS countries, they are trading with the other countries outside the group. Especially, like for example, if you take a country like India, largely we have seen like it is trying to trade for the same commodities. It is importing from East Asia, or it is importing from the Europe, or it has been importing from United States of America. So there is a room for intra-BRICS trade, given this example that revealed competitiveness among the commodities that could be seen, like 22 commodities are showing competitiveness that could be tapped by the BRICS countries. Then
request you to conclude, please.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Then the stability of this index is also being tested to see that when there is a revealed competitiveness that is exhibited in a particular year, whether the same competitiveness could be seen in the later years. So in these product groups, largely it is seen that the revealed competitiveness largely did not change, and similarly the value of the beta value also did not change over a period of time, presenting that over a period of time, the Chinese competitiveness is not changing drastically while trading with the rest of the BRICS countries. So with this limitations of the research is only commodity trade is taken into consideration, and there is a space for including services trade also in the future research. So with this, a few words that the countries have taken a pledge that intra-BRICS trade is they are going to see that the intra-BRICS trade is going to rise in the coming future, and many policy initiatives in this direction have been taken in the previous BRICS summit, and China has been observed having revealed comparative advantage and revealed competitiveness among many nearly 22 commodity categorizations. So there is this could be tapped by the other BRICS countries, and other BRICS countries could look towards China, and China could look towards other BRICS countries to see that the intra-BRICS trade increases for the mutual benefit of all the countries. So thank you, sir, with this.
Thank you, Dr. Radha. Very good presentation. We'll reserve the comments, but one comment that I wish to make is that while there is potential of trade happening between countries, I think the political economy will that increase the trade deficit, the already widening trade deficit of the individual countries with respect to China, and how can individual countries become more, how can trade within BRICS become more balanced? Although economists would suggest that if you're able to import more efficiently, then there shouldn't be a problem. But I think the political economy also focuses on bilateral current account deficits, and therefore a more balanced trading environment becomes a policy, not a requirement, but a policy feature which needs to be addressed as well. And the other thing about BRICS, of course, is that the diversity in the systems, both in the political and economic systems within the BRICS. Now, for the last presentation, we'll come back to Dr. Das and give him about 3 minutes to wrap up. But before I go to Dr. Das, let me invite Dr. Nalin Kumar to make the final presentation of the session, which is, again, an important topic: trade irritants and non-tariff measures between China and India. Dr. Nalin?
Yes.
10 minutes, please.
Sure. Thank you, Rajat sir, Dr. Arindam, and I thank AICCS for giving us this privilege. Hope I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible. Please, go ahead.
Yes, let me share the slide. Yes. I start with the title. It's on trade irritants and non-tariff measures, what somewhat discussed in lesser amount compared to the prominent issues that are quite often being discussed when it comes to India and China's trade, like growing trade deficit, geopolitical tensions, and so on. So we just thought this is an area we have been working on, and then share some of the field insights. And this is not a very technically loaded paper. We designed in a very descriptive way, where we try to capture the anecdotal evidence and some field insights based on some survey of experts who trade with China. So the focus is mostly on the perspective is from the Indian side. So coming to the outline of this presentation, we just see the non-tariff measures on the rise with the falling tariffs worldwide. And though this is a larger area, and then still many of the countries are grappling with try to understand its magnitude and potential to be some new barriers. It of course has a negative connotation whenever we say non-tariff measures, but it's not the case. So we try to throw some light on that as well. But in some cases, it has a potential to turn into a negative sort of impact. So the bilateral trade between China and India, we are literally preempted by many speakers in this conference. So though I have a customary figure to share with you in one of the slides, actual and potential, we try to make use of the ITC's market access website, where we just see the actual trade and the potential trade. And then we try to see how NTMs are prevalent in those sectors. In the case of both, of course, for India, imports assume as much importance as exports, because many of the parts and components we trade with, and then the fragmented production networks in the modern context. So imports assume equal importance, and then all these NTMs are seen in that perspective as well. So many of the regulatory measures, these are broadly, and the predominance in some of these sectors. And then what actually happens on the ground reality, which is not really captured with many of the, of course, many of the multilateral agencies like UNTAD and ITC are coming up with. Of course, many of the national ministries are coming up with their own attempts to capture and quantify this kind of data. Wherein we have to go beyond the actual trade volume and value sort of concepts. Then we conclude. So this is roughly the outline, and I try to confine it within 10 minutes. So non-tariff measures, as tariffs fell, non-tariff measures were on the rise worldwide, and these are built into multilateral, regional, or bilateral agreements. So it is a very least likely case. Most of the countries experience one or the other, and most of the products traded around the world. Its coverage is so high. Any product that we pick would come under one of the other non-tariff measure. So though mostly has a negative connotation, they are in fact protective. It could be protective of health, and especially in the pandemic era. These things assume significance, and we know how the pandemics they spread, and then there could be many issues right from food safety to toxic waste. So standards do play a very crucial role in that way. But standard setting organizations can play a very vital role along with ministries. Just as the chair mentioned at the beginning, there could be tough issues with something like Ministry of Commerce with Ministry of External Affairs. So this is an area where these kind of things come into picture. And if not properly understood, the understanding has to happen at different levels, at the ministerial level, at the diplomatic level, at the exporter level, at the customs house agents level. So it could be, if they're not properly recognized or understood in its own letter and spirit, it could be elusive, uncertain, and costly. So we have certain documented evidence. So all our co-authors have been doing periodically one or the other exporter surveys, or we interact with customs house agents. And this is how some of these anecdotal evidences were captured. And then there's a high likelihood to become barriers, which are often referred to as NTBs. So I often feel in most of the content, they are often used interchangeably, which is quite unscientific. And there has been a lot of evolutions and refinements over the recent years, especially in terms of the statistics related to non-tariff measures. For instance, this literature, which is a very recent one, 2018, 2 years back, the unseen impact of NTMs, insights from a new database. So this is something all the multilateral agencies have been collecting this kind of data for a long time, but of late, there are certain, they standardize some of the methods to collect, and they come up with some policy toolkit for countries to work on, and then classify some of the non-tariff measures that would come. And we focus on the NTMs between China and India and discuss in a descriptive framework. And we confine mostly to those sectors which have the potential or the prominence. So we excluded many of the other. So this is something like we are literally preempted on this. So this is just like a customary thing that I wanted to. So when we talk about NTMs, there are many standards and its manifestations that would come. What you see on the screen now, there could be something like sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, or what we call SPS in short, is something that refers to the infestation of pest in an agri-food item or a fruit. So that could become a barrier if not properly treated, or the exporter is not fully aware of, or the export certifying agency doesn't do proper certification in place, and so on. So the consignment could be detained at the importing location, or could be rejected or destroyed in the eventual case. So these things turn out to be very costly and difficult to deal with all the mechanisms that are in place. And secondly, maybe if you focus on the second picture, this talks about information and compatibility. So standards are in place to convey some compatibilities. I am able to present on this PowerPoint because it is compatible to Zoom and then sharing the screen, because most of the softwares are standardized. So that way standards are taken in a very positive sense. But when it comes to an agri-food item, it's not really the case, because standards keep changing, and then there are different food safety requirements that are in place from time to time, and so on. Then if we have a standard plug point in the Indian context and it doesn't fit into European, this one then comes. So many standards often pose a problem because it results in incompatibility. And the third one is about standardized, maybe the ingredient content, how much of high-strength steel is included in a, or built into an automobile so that it passes a crash test or something like this. So there are different manifestations of the so-called non-tariff measures. So all these things are should be taken positively. And then finally, there could be measures like some certifying. Even if the exported item is free of all, could be a contaminant, could be free of pesticides or free of pest. But still, if the certificate is not in place, then it could be detained or rejected. So there are a few documentation issues which comes under the broader rubric of trade facilitation. So these are the NTM chapters under coverage. This remains more or less the same over the period of time. Starting from A with SPS measures, and then comes technical barriers to trade. TBT is one of the non-tariff measure but the name itself is a barrier. So TBT, technical barriers to trade. And then comes pre-shipment inspections and other formalities which come under the technical categories. And there is a whole lot of non-technical measures that would come. And then finally, it runs up to P. And P stands for export-related measures. And then there are many subcategories. So all put together, it runs into 178 measures in total. So there was quite a lot which an exporter has to comply with. Similarly, an importer has to comply with in terms of satisfying all these requirements. So let us just move on to what is predominant. So we just took some data from the Suntad recent survey on this NTM. Suntad as a trains database. And what we see is predominantly most of the measures would come under either of A, B, and then the last P. Either they come under the SPS, sanitary, phytosanitary, or technical barriers to trade. That accounts for a significant portion of the overall. We have listed only the most important ones, not that all of them are listed. And interestingly, we see quite a lot of measures are imposed by the country itself, not by the importing country, not by the buyer's country. Within the country, the exporting country itself imposes certain regulations which the exporters have to comply with. So that is again form a significant part in both the countries. So these are in terms of the intensity in the international trade imposed by these countries. So this table gives us an insight into how many measures are, and I'll just in the next slide just disaggregate some of these measures in the sense motor vehicles, parts and accessories have to comply with 37 number of measures as import requirements for product from India to China. So if China has to import and India has to export, it has to go through 37 requirements. So all those things like A and subcategory, B and its subcategory, P and its subcategory would all pitch in. Of course, SPS doesn't come in the case of motor vehicle parts, but frozen shrimps and prawns, some of these things, 89 from India to China. So definitely, and then it's not something really important from the China's perspective, but we just thought of putting a comparative perspective. So in the case of China, it is only 14. In the case of frozen shrimps and prawns, it's 51 compared to 89 if India has to export. Castor oil is, so these are the products which have got tremendous potential as per ITC's survey. And then we just thought of putting one other agribusiness item, that is chocolate and other food preparation, and this is how the figures stack up. So this definitely means in case something goes wrong, not necessarily the food safety or pest infestation possibility or any other technical requirement, one of these 89 or one of these 37 requirements could be invoked just to stop a consignment from getting into, in case they get the same consignment or similar consignment from somewhere else at a lower price. So yeah, these are the kind of requirements that are in place. Something like B that comes under technical barriers to trade, B840, that's a code. Product inspection requirement by the importing country. It may be performed by a public authority or private entities. It does not include. So this comes under inspection requirements. So like this, there are 178 number of lines which are referred to as the NPM lines. The final product requirements, the ingredient content, then export NTMs. This shows that sometimes company has to devote efforts associated and associated costs to comply with these requirements of their own national governments before they engage in complying with the other. So we just had recently interacting with some, during the pandemic, interacting with some of the exporters. Just thought of sharing a couple of such instances here before we close. So these things for instance, iron ore exports, and exports typically are contracted, and at the time of entering into the contract, only partial payments are made, which is 10%. Especially we interviewed one exporter with a customs house agent who is exporting iron ores to China, and then it takes 35 to 40 days in the transshipment, the shipment, and then it is reaching a post like Shanghai or something. So it goes from Gujarat's Mundra post, and then so Chinese import iron ore from various parts of the world. Australia is a prominent one. And in case in between this 35 to 40 days is a very critical time for many of the smaller exporters. And then they actually can't assure the delivery. In case one has to, so any of these kind of NTMs can be invoked based on the price. If you get a lower price in between, they are able to contract with another party. Then one of these NTMs could be invoked, and then they can actually block or resend the container, which actually puts many of the smaller exporters at a highly disadvantageous position, whereas bigger exporters can actually take it back and then resend it somewhere else. So they show some resilience, if not competitive. So in the pandemic and then in the modern times, it is the resilience that actually matters more than the competitiveness. And most of us would agree that we can't compete with China in terms of cost. So it's a resilience that actually matters. So when it comes to summary, we just see the dominance of SPS, TBT, and export controls on both sides. And this accounts for a significant portion of the NTMs that are in place. And not necessarily that the coverage actually turns out to be a concern. The coverage is good because health and environment will be protected, at least in principle. But the point is, any of these things can be invoked and to block the container. So particularly difficult for new and smaller exporters. So we have to actually think how small and medium exporters deal with this kind of uncertainties. This is actually where trade facilitation has to happen in a more inclusive way, which doesn't happen in the maybe in the true spirit. And the bigger ones, some of these incentives turn out to be counterproductive. And there are one aspect which we would like to point out is the difficulty in quantifying this kind of, when it comes to EU market or the US market, we have some in the sense in terms of border rejection, and we get the data, and then some quantification is possible. But when it comes to China, it is somewhat opaque. It is not that transparent when it comes to sharing the data, or quite a lot of attributes come in there, and then it poses a difficulty in this kind of. So many smaller exporters get completely wiped off, and we had seen in the case of Gujarat and Odisha. So in terms of conclusion and suggestions, you would suggest some active trade facilitation should happen that's more inclusive, and the standards ecosystem has to evolve more fast, because now these things matter more than the tariffs and many of the other things that were important earlier. Now certifying machinery, ease of doing business, and within that, trading across border captures quite a lot of this kind of things. And then the institutions have to co-evolve. Like I was saying, trade and diplomatic channels have to work together to deal with these NTBs. And that's how the smaller exporters have to be really facilitated. And collecting trade statistics, we get it at different levels, but they have to actually go beyond this typical value and volume and then say how it performs. So these things are not even covered with UNTAD trains, and that's something we could get from the field insight that happened. So institutions have to collect NTB data in a more systematic way as well. So with this, I conclude. I think I was within the time, and I should compress the discussant. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Naren.
Thank you.
Fascinating presentation. I think, as you rightly said, what is happening in the world today is that tariffs are now quite low in most countries, and to that extent, that's been a success of multilateralism and bilateralism. But non-tariff measures and non-tariff barriers are increasing. As protection increases, the new route for protection is non-tariff barriers. Thank you. We are short of time, so may I request Dr. Das, if he is here, to, for just 3 minutes to conclude before I pass on to the discussant, please. Not more than 3 minutes, Dr. Das. We have really short of time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate. I'll take 3 minutes only. So I hope you could hear what I had said about the trade investment aid and the strategic importance of South Asia. So from that, I'll just summarize. One point to note here is that there is, catching up of trade, especially with respect to India, be it in import front or export front. However, we can see asymmetry not only with respect to India. If you look at the left-hand axis, say monthly export or import of say $6 or $5 billion compared to the export of about $1.5 billion. So there is asymmetry, but the asymmetry could be found even for other, South Asian countries. Be it Nepal, you see the numbers on export figure and import figure, they are quite different. Similarly, with respect to Pakistan as well. And that is what I was referring to here, that there is asymmetry. Even then, China factor is quite, present in South Asian context. But when it comes to India, the engagement, be it economic or, on strategic front, has remained selective for various reasons. And some of those reasons are quite familiar to us. However, going forward, what it holds, what India can do to integrate and improve the prosperity with South Asia is the key question, because I want to show a separate figure which is not in a paper, but I have added it here, that yes, there is a reduction in trade post-COVID with respect to China, but that is also seen with respect to India. India also trading quite low with the South Asia, Asian countries, even after COVID. So that means China relatively is still a strong player. So that is what is, observed economically. And in strategic front, we have seen these all, interplay, be it China with respect to South Asia, or India with respect to South Asia, or with the Quad countries with respect to South Asia. But final point is that how to address the concerns of South Asian countries, how to improve the synergy, and how to mitigate risk when the South Asian countries are facing a shortage of even food. So that these are the aspects India will have to address to remain relevant in the South Asian discourse. That is what I want to say, and why I want to say that the South Asian countries need to remain neutral or independent in terms of their alignment, because we have seen the case of Maldives or seen the case of other countries where when government changes, whole thing changes. So that is not good either. So therefore, if they promote fair competition among the countries in terms of economic projects, that would not involve wiping out of the gains made from the earlier either investment projects or trade. So that is in brief my summary. And thank you so much. And I would like to hear from the discussion.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Das. I'm now going to right away hand over to Arindam for his comments and review of all the 4 papers, and also use that as an opportunity to request him to summarize, because we are really out of time. So Arindam, the floor is yours as you see fit.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kathuria. And just kind of give me a reminder at the head of 8 minutes so that I don't shoot over the time as well. So, again, I thank and congratulate the paper presenters, but also to the organizers for putting up this session. Particularly 4 different papers, but very much interconnected. And I think the 4 papers, each of them in their own different way, is actually kind of highlighting or capturing the context of policy, of particularly international economic policy, trade policy in the contemporary world. Clearly, I mean, just to kind of, before I comment a little bit on the papers, reflect a little bit on the papers. I mean, clearly, we are now in a multilateral or in an international economic situation where I mean the consensus over free trade and multilateralism that existed 20 years back is clearly not there anymore. The trade environment itself, the international trade environment itself has have become much more complex than what it was, say, in the 1990s or early 2000s. And of course, we all understand that the global economic crisis was one reason which starts our journey towards the trade wars. But of course, with the US-China trade war and the US kind of imposing several restrictions of trade on China, but also directed towards the European Unions, I think, I mean, we are in a completely different world of trade policy. And recognizing that, I think all these papers in their own way contribute in shaping or influencing policy, economic policy. I mean, whether it's a question of bilateral trade policies or being part of certain regional trade agreements, RTAs, or I mean, to kind of, and essentially, I mean, trade policy itself has entered an era of greater strategic trade policy, and not really a completely simple or simplified. I mean, that consensus across a large number of countries that had emerged in the last century clearly is not there. And of course, we know that WTO itself kind of faced certain barriers right from the Doha development round. But at the level of ideas, multilateralism or consensus over free trade was still there. But I mean, over the last 4 or 5 years, clearly even that consensus is breaking down. Now, in that context, if you're looking at, I mean, if I kind of reflect on the first paper, I mean, the whole question of FDIs in India, I mean, again, a very interesting paper because it gives us a historical overview of what was successful in China, what was not so successful in China, and therefore what are the, I mean, indicators for us in terms of what all we can do. Now, I mean, obviously, I mean, there's no, two thoughts about the fact that in the current geopolitical scenario, if there is a decline of any kind of economic force, I mean, you should try to take advantage of it. So if China is facing a difficulty in the context of the pandemic, I mean, economically, it makes all the sense for you to kind of rush it. But at the same time, I mean, one needs to be a little cautious in the sense that, you know, I mean, the kind of developments that would have happened in China, I mean, which is again, Professor Kathuria was referring to that 20 years of growth at the rate of 10 years, and something unprecedented in the history of the world economy. Again, there are certain combination of factors which really kind of led to that kind of economic growth in China. At the same time, there were a certain other set of factors which came to combine, which led to a certain kind of a growth in India, which was more service sector led, less of manufacturing. We did not see that manufacturing expansion in India as we saw in China. Now, I mean, again, Chinese large, the whole reverse engineering in China was a major factor in that manufacturing boost. A certain, set of policies regarding to SEZs, which was correctly pointed out in the paper as being successful in attracting FDI, but also, labor reforms and cheap labor. And I mean, today we are, of course, we are also appreciating that labor itself, labor laws needs to be reformed, and so that you can get that advantage of more and more investments. What one needs to keep in mind is that socio-political systems are also greatly different between China and India. I mean, we still, have a much more democratic system compared to what China has, and therefore managing those social conflicts the way China can do whatever China can do in their own political system may not always be possible. In that, context, what I was kind of trying to point out is that should we simply try to copy and replace China in the world economy? Or will that necessarily work? Because that was driven by, whatever areas China, achieved success was driven by a particular set of factors. On the other hand, there was a certain different set of factors which led to certain amount of economic success in India as well over the last 20 years and 20, 25 years. And therefore, is there a case for identifying niche areas when we want to kind of develop our own economic activities? Why are we not necessarily thinking about startups, platform-based economic activities as areas where we can attract foreign direct investment? And this is important because I think, the knowledge economy in India is much more developed than many other developing countries. So that is one thing that, so when we are thinking about taking advantage in a situation of crisis and making a revival, I think along with, I'm not saying that again, whatever areas China has lost out is not important for us. We should definitely go in there, but at the same time, not lose sight of our own advantages, niche areas which have evolved from within our socio-political system. So that's one. On the second paper, it's a little bit of pity that we couldn't hear out Khanindra entirely, given that he had some connectivity issues. But I think it's a very important paper. What is South Asia for China? Again, in a geopolitical context, I think the Indian Ocean trade is important for any power in the world economy which wants to be a leading power. It's something that we have witnessed from the 16th century onwards as to how the Indian ocean trade and its dynamics have remained very important. So that is something, and that is where China needs to have a greater engagement in South Asia. And again, won't go into great details into the paper, but a couple of observations that I saw from the very interesting data that he showed. One, of course, the fact that export imports are declining during the pandemic is something I won't be too much bothered about. That would be happening across the world, across the global economy. And you pick up any two countries, you would find those declines. But there's something very interesting in the data. And that is where I find that, if you look at that October, November for 2020 and compare it with 2019, you find between India and China, China's exports are rising, have risen, whereas India's exports to China have not yet risen. So this is a matter of great concern, I think, particularly. So it's like, we are still creating demand for Chinese goods. We are not creating that much demand for our own goods. And the Chinese are not creating that much demand for our own goods. So we are clearly, again, from the point of view of trade deficit, we are again in a more vulnerable situation. So something to really watch out. And of course, I would request Khanindra that, we need to watch out for this data for the next 6 months. That's going to be very crucial. Where, of course, every country has declined in terms of their markets and economic activities. But what is the pattern of revival? And I think that is coming to, again, the third point, again, third paper, again, a very interesting and very comprehensive analysis of Brics, the dynamics of trade within Brics. It points out the drivers of trade between these countries. It would be good to look at services. Because that's where I think just the analysis of goods, manufacturing goods or other kinds of goods shows India, the Indian trends do not come out, I guess, in its wholesome manner. So that would be one good thing to bring into that paper. And at the same time, again, in the larger context, it's the Brics is still important. China has very well realized that if you really want to reach economic greatness, it cannot simply be on the basis of your domestic economy. You need to expand your influence. That has been the history of capitalism over the last 300 years. And China is through the BRI Belt and Road Initiative is clearly, has taken the initiative. India, again, there was this talk about the Asia-Africa growth corridor where, African countries, Australia, Japan, US, trying to form an arc over the Indian Ocean. Again, India, should not give up on that, although there are certain contradictions given that Australia, Japan, US are developed economies. India's contradictions are often very different from these countries, but nonetheless, that is something that needs to be explored. And similarly, the Brics, in spite of the diversity within, is also an avenue that needs to be explored and taken very seriously in the world of trade policy. And finally, just to end with Nalin and his co-authors' papers on the non-tariff measures, again, very interesting study and very important in the current context, primarily because, with multilateralism and as again Professor Kathuria pointed out, that it was the success of bilateralism and multilateralism that the tariffs went down. But once you lose a consensus over free trade, the non-tariff measures actually start becoming much more important in trying to protect your own domestic interests. So protectionism does make a comeback. It can be ecological regulations. There might be other kinds of regulations, phytosanitary regulations, quality regulations. But again, this is an important area, particularly in the current context of formulating trade policy, because you exactly know what is to be negotiated about, what are those important factors. There's no point in just simply talking about tariffs. And so therefore, I think, again, I would like to thank Nalin and his co-authors for bringing this on the table. And this is definitely an area to watch out for in trade policy. Again, thanks everybody. Thanks to all the presenters.
Thank you, Arindam. I think you provided a rich set of comments and review for the authors. Unfortunately, we do not have time for question and answers because there is a valedictory session which is to proceed in a few minutes, and the organizers need some time to make that transition. So unfortunately, there's going to be no question answer, but I'm sure you can interact with the authors, you can interact with the Institute of Chinese Studies for the papers, and if you want to give comments to the authors, I'm sure you'll be more than welcome to do so. But it's been a privilege to be able to host this session, to chair this session. Thank you, Ambassador Kant, and thank you, Institute of Chinese Studies and IIT Madras, for giving me this opportunity. I've learned a lot, despite the fact that I work on trade. I've learned a lot from this session. And this is not the last that we've heard of FDI and competitive federalism and non-tariff measures and trade integration within the Brics and trade integration within other regions like South Asia and China's growing influence in the world. And that has to be watched out for, and how the US and other countries are going to respond to that. So a very enlightening session, very rich session. Thank you all very much. And thank you individual authors, Shubhi, Dr. Das, Dr. Radha, Dr. Nalin, and all the co-authors for a wonderful session. Back to you, Preksha.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you for chairing the session, as well as